Helen woke up before her alarm went off. She got out of bed and went to the bathroom, where the mirror reflected the look of a middle-aged woman with marked dark circles and brown hair gathered in a hurried bun. After a quick shower, she put on her immaculate white uniform and left her small apartment. The journey to the hospital was short, but enough for Helen to mentally prepare for the day. She walked with a firm step, while mentally reviewing the cases she had to attend to. Upon arriving at the hospital, she was greeted by the usual hustle and bustle of the emergency room. She greeted the nurses and went to her office, where she found the first folder of the day. Max Puth, a new patient with worrying symptoms. Max was a wealthy businessman, known in the city for his success and philanthropy. He had been admitted to the hospital with vague but alarming symptoms: severe headaches, abdominal spasms, and shortness of breath. Helen greeted him with a professional smile and led him to the examination room. "Good morning, Mr. Puth. I'm Dr. Briggs. I see you've been having some problems lately," she said, reviewing his notes. "Good morning, Doctor," Max replied in a weak voice. "Yes, I've been feeling very ill, and the symptoms seem to be getting worse." Helen examined him meticulously, ordering a series of tests to rule out various conditions. However, the results showed nothing conclusive. Despite her best efforts, she could not find a clear cause for Max's symptoms. Days later, Max's condition worsened drastically, and despite receiving intensive treatment, he died unexpectedly. Helen was devastated. She had followed all the protocols. She had done everything possible, but it had not been enough. The hospital reacted immediately. The administration summoned her to an urgent meeting. The atmosphere was tense as Helen entered the conference room. The chief administrator, Dr. Warren, looked at her coldly. "Dr. Briggs, we have reviewed Mr. Puth's case," Warren began. "His death has caused quite a stir, and we are concerned about the possibility of medical malpractice." Helen felt a knot in her stomach. "I have followed all the procedures, Dr. Warren. The medications I prescribed are safe, and everything can be verified." Warren shook his head. "We do not know how you treated the patient, but the results speak for themselves. You should prepare for the worst. The police will come to take your statement, and, for now, you are suspended from your duties." Helen could barely hold back tears as she nodded. She left the office feeling humiliated and undone. Despair washed over her, and all she wanted to do was cover her face and cry. That same afternoon, after receiving her severance pay and a formal reprimand, Helen decided to visit Max's grave. Although the news of his death had been recent, she felt the need to pay her respects and find some kind of solace. She bought a wreath and a bouquet of carnations on her way to the cemetery. When she arrived, she found Max's grave from afar, decorated with numerous bouquets and a large oak crucifix. To her surprise, there were two men dressed in black next to the grave. Helen approached cautiously and placed the flowers next to the crucifix, bowing her head in respect. Helen walked slowly towards the cemetery, each step accompanied by a whirlwind of thoughts. The weight of injustice on her shoulders was overwhelming. She remembered every detail of Max Puth's care, from his admission to the fatal outcome. Despite having followed all the protocols, she had been fired and singled out as the culprit. She needed answers and some peace. Upon reaching Max's grave, Helen stopped short when she heard voices. Two men dressed in black were speaking in a foreign language, their words tinged with mockery. Although she was not fluent in that language, Helen could understand enough. "Who would have thought this great man would end up like this?" said one of the men in a scornful tone. "It's ironic, isn't it? All that wealth couldn't save him," replied the other, laughing. Indignation burned in Helen's chest. Who were these men, and why were they talking about Max like that? She approached cautiously without making a sound and hid behind a large nearby monument to listen better. At least he doesn't have to worry about those problems anymore. Although it wasn't exactly as we planned, continued the first. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. Problems? Plans? Her curiosity was piqued. The men walked away laughing, leaving Helen with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Her heart racing, she walked towards Max's grave, observing the spot where the men had been. Suddenly, a strange sound made her stop. It was a low groan, barely audible, that seemed to be coming from the ground. She bent down, trying to listen better. "Is anyone there?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. The groan was repeated, louder this time. Helen felt a knot in her stomach. She jumped up and ran towards the cemetery keeper's lodge, where Mr. Cobb, the elderly caretaker, greeted her with a warm smile. "Helen, what a surprise to see you here," said Mr. Cobb, his eyes reflecting genuine affection. "Mr. Cobb, I need your help. I think there's someone alive in Max Puth's grave," Helen said, trying to stay calm. Mr. Cobb frowned, but the urgency in Helen's voice convinced him. He took a shovel and a flashlight and followed Helen back to the grave. Helen pointed to the exact spot, and Mr. Cobb began to dig, his movements quick and precise despite his age. After what seemed like an eternity, Mr. Cobb's shovel hit something hard. Carefully, they cleared the dirt to reveal a coffin. The lid was cracked, and from within came the faint groans. With a joint effort, Helen and Mr. Cobb lifted the lid. Inside the coffin lay a pale, weak man, barely conscious. It was not Max Puth. Helen felt a mixture of relief and horror. "Who are you?" Helen asked softly. The man opened his eyes with difficulty. "I'm Ethan, he murmured before passing out. Helen and Mr. Cobb pulled him out of the coffin and laid him down on the grass. As they waited for the ambulance, Helen quickly examined Ethan, making sure he was breathing and his pulse was stable. The ambulance arrived and took Ethan to the nearest hospital. Helen decided to follow, wanting to make sure he would be okay and hoping to get some answers about how he ended up buried in Max's grave. Hours later, in the hospital waiting room, Helen was informed that Ethan was stable and that she would be able to talk to him soon. When she finally entered the room, Ethan was awake, although visibly exhausted. "Thank you for saving me," Ethan said hoarsely. "What happened to you? How did you end up in that coffin?" asked Helen, her mind still trying to take it all in. Ethan sighed and began to tell his story. He had been tricked by some men who offered him a temporary job. Desperate for money, he accepted without asking too many questions. They drugged him and buried him alive in Max Puth's place. Helen listened carefully, her compassion for Ethan growing with each word. She knew she had to find out the truth behind all this, not only to clear her name, but also to get justice for Ethan. "I'm going to help you, Ethan. We're going to find out who did this and why," Helen said determinedly. Ethan nodded gratefully. Helen left the room with a new purpose, her initial despair transforming into a fierce determination. She knew the road would be difficult, but she was ready to face it. Helen sat at her desk, surrounded by papers, medical reports, and scattered notes. The morning sun streamed through the window, but her mind was trapped in the darkness of uncertainty. She knew that to clear her name and find the truth about Max's death, she needed to start from scratch. First, she began to gather information about Max Puth's life. Although he was known for his wealth and philanthropy, something in his story didn't add up. She called former colleagues and mutual friends, but the answers were vague and evasive. No one seemed to really know who Max was. One day, while reviewing her notes at a coffee shop, a man approached her. It was Enrique, a former college classmate, now a taxi driver. "Helen, is that you?" Enrique asked, surprised. "Enrique," she exclaimed. "What are you doing here?" "I work nearby. I heard about Max and your situation. Can I sit down?" Enrique, who had lost his legs in a heroic act during his time in the police force, now wore prosthetics. His experience and determination were still intact, and Helen saw in him a valuable ally. "I'm trying to understand what happened to Max," Helen said, inviting him to sit down. "Can you help me?" Enrique nodded. "Of course. You know I'm always willing to help a friend. Tell me everything." As Helen recounted the recent events, Enrique took mental notes, analyzing every detail with precision. "There's something that doesn't add up," Enrique said thoughtfully. "If Max was really that sick, why are there no clear records of his treatment?" Helen nodded. "That's what worries me. And then there's the issue of the men at the cemetery, and Ethan, the man we found buried in his place." Enrique frowned. "We need to dig deeper. Maybe Max had enemies, or debts we don't know about." They decided to start their investigation in the most obvious place, Max's financial environment. Helen used her contacts at the hospital, and Enrique used his contacts in the police force to obtain information about Max's finances. What they found was startling. Max had huge debts with very dangerous people. "This explains why he tried to disappear," Enrique said, showing the documents to Helen. "It seems he was involved in something much bigger than we imagined." As they dug deeper, they uncovered links between Max and an organized crime syndicate. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Max had faked his death to escape his creditors and had used Ethan as a scapegoat. One night, while they were reviewing the documents at Helen's apartment, Enrique noticed something peculiar in one of the contracts. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a name. "This is one of the men you mentioned from the cemetery. Do you think he's connected?" Helen looked at him in astonishment. "He has to be. We have to follow this lead." The investigation led them to dark and dangerous places in the city. Every step they took brought them closer to the truth, but it also increased the risk. They began to receive anonymous threats warning them to stop. "We are stepping on the toes of someone very powerful," said Enrique as he tucked his gun into his belt. "But we can't stop now." Finally, they had a breakthrough. They found evidence that Max had been laundering money for the crime syndicate, using his businesses as a front. This explained his huge debts and the need to disappear. "This is enough to take to the police," said Helen, looking at the evidence. "But we need more, something to close the case completely." Enrique nodded. "We're going to need witnesses, people who can corroborate all of this." Helen contacted former employees of Max, many of whom were willing to talk on condition of anonymity. Their testimonies painted a clear picture of a desperate man caught in a web of lies and crimes. One night, while they were going over the testimonies, they heard a noise at the door. When they opened it, they found a note taped to it. "Last warning. Stop or face the consequences." Helen looked at Enrique with determination. "We can't stop now. We're too close." Enrique nodded. "You're right. We're going to see this through to the end." The tension was mounting, but so was their resolve. They knew they were close to uncovering the whole truth and bringing Max and his accomplices to justice. As they progressed in their investigation, Helen and Enrique realized that their lives were changing. They were not only seeking justice for Max and themselves, but they were also rediscovering their purpose and inner strength. The search for the truth had united them in a common cause, and although the path was dangerous, they were determined to move forward, no matter the cost. The afternoon was waning as Helen and Enrique sat in the small office they had improvised in Helen's apartment. Documents, photos, and notes were scattered across the table, creating a complex map of Max Puth's connections. The air was tense as they analyzed the data, trying to understand every detail of Max's plan. "It makes sense," Enrique said, pointing to a diagram on the paper. "Max was in serious financial trouble. The debts with these creditors are huge and dangerous." Helen nodded, her face reflecting the gravity of the situation. "But to fake his own death, it's extreme. How did he get Ethan to take his place?" Enrique leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Ethan mentioned that he was tricked. They offered him a temporary job, probably well paid, so he would accept without hesitation. And once they had him," continued Helen, "they sedated him and buried him alive in Max's place. It's a risky move, but effective if done right." Silence fell as they both reflected on the magnitude of what they had discovered. Helen broke the silence first. "We need to understand why Max chose this moment to disappear. Is there something else we're missing?" Enrique got up and started pacing the room. "I've been thinking about that. Remember the names the men at the cemetery mentioned?" "Yes," Helen replied, reviewing her notes. "One of them was clearly linked to Max's debts. The other one seemed more mysterious." Enrique nodded. "I think there's a deeper connection here. Max wasn't just running from his debts. He was trying to escape something bigger." "Like what?" Helen asked, intrigued. "An organized crime syndicate," Enrique said gravely. "Max didn't just owe money. He was involved in money laundering for them." Helen fell silent, absorbing the information. That would explain why he was so desperate. But why would he seek refuge with his father, John Puth? "Because John is a powerful man," Enrique replied, "and even though Max was in trouble, he knew his father had the resources to protect him." Helen's mind began to work quickly. "We need to contact John Puth. If Max is going to seek refuge, his father must be prepared." Enrique nodded. "Agreed, but we must be cautious. We don't know how much John knows about his son's activities." Helen picked up her phone and dialed the number they had obtained after many calls and contacts. The phone rang several times before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Yes? Who is this?" "Good morning, Mr. Puth," Helen said, trying to remain calm. "My name is Helen Briggs. I'm investigating some matters related to your son, Max Puth." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. "What do you want from me?" "We believe your son is in danger," Helen continued. "We'd like to speak to you in person to discuss what we've discovered." John Puth sighed audibly. "Very well. Come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. I don't have time to waste." "Thank you, Mr. Puth. We'll see you tomorrow," Helen replied before hanging up. Enrique looked at her approvingly. "Good work. This could be crucial." Helen nodded, but her mind was full of unanswered questions. "Do you think John knows what Max has done?" "I don't know," Enrique replied. "But we'll find out soon enough." That night, Helen could barely sleep. The prospect of confronting John Puth, such a powerful man, unnerved her. But she knew it was necessary. If Max was really going to seek refuge with his father, they needed to be one step ahead. The late afternoon sun was slowly setting as Helen and Enrique arrived at John Puth's imposing mansion. The road here had been arduous and full of obstacles, but finally they were close to unraveling the whole truth. The mansion's facade, with its white columns and impeccably manicured gardens, concealed the dark secrets that were about to come to light. "Are you ready?" Enrique asked, adjusting his prosthesis before getting out of the car. "More than ever," Helen replied, determination gleaming in her eyes. They climbed the stairs and rang the doorbell. An elderly butler opened the door, looking at them with curiosity and suspicion. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice grave. "We're here to see Mr. John Puth. It's an urgent matter," Helen said firmly. The butler hesitated for a moment before letting them in. He led them to a large living room decorated with antique paintings and luxurious furniture. John Puth, an elderly man, but still imposing, rose from his chair and looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Mr. Puth, my name is Helen Briggs, and this is Enrique. We are investigating the death of your son, Max Puth," Helen began. John Puth frowned but gestured for them to sit down. "Go on." Helen and Enrique began to recount everything they had discovered: Max's debts, his plan to fake his death, and how he had used Ethan as a scapegoat. John Puth's expression went from disbelief to contained rage. "Max was always a problem, but I never imagined he would go this far," Puth said, his voice shaking with fury. "How can I help you?" "We need your cooperation to catch Max. We know he'll try to seek refuge here," Enrique said, holding up a folder of incriminating documents. "If you can help us apprehend him, we can make sure he faces justice." Puth nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. No one should get away with what he's done." As they prepared the trap for Max, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Helen and Enrique made sure everything was in place, while Puth made a call to Max, feigning ignorance and offering his help. "Everything is ready. We just have to wait," Enrique said, watching the entrance of the mansion from a window. The atmosphere in John Puth's mansion was tense. Helen and Enrique had managed to convince Puth to collaborate with them to catch Max. They knew Max would seek refuge there, and Puth was willing to help put an end to his son's lies and crimes. The clock struck 5 in the afternoon when a black car pulled up in front of the main entrance. Helen, hidden behind a curtain, watched with bated breath. Enrique stood by the door, ready to intervene if things went wrong. Max got out of the car, looking around suspiciously. He walked quickly to the door, which Puth had left ajar for him. As he entered, the tension in the air was palpable. "Dad, I need your help," Max said, trying to sound desperate and repentant. "Everything went wrong." Puth, maintaining a neutral expression, let him enter completely before taking a step back. It was then that the police, who were hiding, came out to surround him. The surprise on Max's face quickly turned to panic. "What is this?" he shouted, pulling out a knife in a desperate attempt to break through. Before he could move further, Enrique lunged forward, placing himself between Max and John. The knife found its mark, piercing Enrique's abdomen. The room erupted in chaos as the police disarmed Max and subdued him on the floor. "Enrique!" Helen screamed, running towards him. Enrique staggered and fell to the ground, his face contorted in pain. Helen knelt beside him, pressing on the wound to stop the bleeding. "Hang on, Enrique. The ambulance is on its way," she said, trying to stay calm. John Puth approached, horrified by the scene. "I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened." Enrique tried to smile, but the pain was too much. "Don't worry. I had to do it." When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics worked quickly to stabilize Enrique. They lifted him onto a stretcher and carried him towards the exit. Helen and John followed closely, their eyes never leaving Enrique. In the ambulance, as one of the paramedics adjusted his bandages, he noticed something on Enrique's side. "Oh, what's this?" he muttered, pointing to a distinctive birthmark. John Puth, who was standing next to Helen, leaned in for a closer look. His eyes widened as he recognized the mark. That mark. My son had one just like it, he said, his voice trembling. Helen looked at him in surprise. What are you saying, John? John swallowed hard, trying to control his emotions. I lost my son in an accident many years ago. I thought he was dead. But that mark, it's identical to the one he had. Enrique, his eyes wide with pain, looked at John in confusion. What are you saying? John moved closer, his eyes welling up with tears. You're my son. I lost you years ago, and I thought I'd never see you again. The ambulance arrived at the hospital, and the paramedics rushed Enrique into the emergency room. Helen and John waited anxiously in the waiting room, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, a doctor came out to speak to them. Enrique is stable for now. The wound is serious, but we believe he'll recover. John breathed a sigh of relief, his hands shaking. Thank God. Helen placed a hand on John's shoulder. This is a lot to take in, but the most important thing now is that Enrique is okay. Hours later, Helen and John were able to see Enrique in the intensive care unit. He was pale, but his breathing was steady. John approached the bed and took Enrique's hand. Enrique, it's me, John, your father, he said softly. I don't know how this happened, but I'm here now, and I'm not leaving your side. Enrique opened his eyes slowly, whispering with difficulty. Dad? Yes, son. I'm here, John replied, tears streaming down his face. Helen watched the scene, feeling a mixture of relief and hope. She knew there was still much to be resolved, but at that moment, the most important thing was that Enrique was safe and with his family. The connection between father and son grew stronger with each word, each tear. Helen, Enrique, and John had faced danger together, and now they were ready to face the future, united by love and truth. The hospital room, despite being a place of pain and fear, was filled with a sense of peace. Enrique's heroic act had not only saved a life, but had also reunited a family separated by years of pain and misunderstanding. As the sun rose, Helen knew that although the road had been difficult, it was worth every sacrifice. Justice was within reach, and together they could face any challenge the future held. Dawn broke with a sense of anticipation in the air. The news of Max Puth's capture had spread like wildfire. Television cameras and reporters crowded in front of John Puth's mansion, eager to cover the scandal. The scene was chaotic, but inside the house there was a sense of calm and determination. Max was led away in handcuffs, surrounded by police officers, as camera flashes illuminated his pale and frightened face. Each step he took towards the patrol car resonated with the weight of his crimes. Max Puth, you are under arrest for fraud, attempted murder, and other charges, announced one of the officers, reading him his rights. Helen and Enrique watched from the doorway, feeling a mixture of relief and vindication. They knew the road had been long and difficult, but finally Max would face the consequences of his actions. The media were quick to cover all angles of the scandal. The headlines spoke of the downfall of a powerful man, of betrayal and deceit. Public opinion was divided between surprise and outrage. Social media was filled with comments, theories, and discussions about the case. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Helen received a call that would change her life once again. Dr. Briggs, the hospital director, would like to see you, the secretary said formally. Helen felt a pang of nervousness as she made her way to the director's office. Upon entering, she was greeted by Dr. Warren, who rose to greet her. Dr. Briggs, please have a seat, he said, his expression serious but cordial. On behalf of the hospital administration, I want to offer you a public apology for the injustice you suffered. We know you followed all protocols and acted professionally at all times." Helen looked at him in surprise. "Thank you, Dr. Warren. This means a lot to me. In addition, we would like to offer you your job back, with all the responsibilities and benefits you had before," Warren continued. "We know you've been through a lot, and we hope you can accept our apology and return to your work." Helen felt a wave of relief and emotion. "I accept. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to redeem myself." The news of her reinstatement was met with joy by her colleagues, who greeted her with smiles and words of support. The feeling of justice and vindication filled Helen's heart, who could now return to doing what she loved without the shadow of doubt hanging over her. Meanwhile, Ethan was starting a new chapter in his life. After being rescued from a desperate situation, he had found a mentor in Mr. Cobb and an opportunity to redeem himself. He began working at the cemetery, assisting with daily tasks and learning about the history and maintenance of the place. "Ethan, you've done a good job today," Mr. Cobb said one afternoon as they were putting away their tools. "I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled, feeling a satisfaction he had not experienced in a long time. "Thank you, Mr. Cobb. I don't know what I would have done without your help." "We all deserve a second chance, Ethan. The important thing is that you're making the most of yours," the old man replied, patting him on the shoulder. The work at the cemetery provided Ethan with a routine and a purpose. Little by little, he gained confidence and stability. He began to save money and plan his future with hope. The darkness of his past began to dissipate, replaced by a light of new opportunities. Helen and Enrique kept in touch with Ethan, supporting him on his road to recovery. The connection they had formed during the investigation had transformed into a deep and sincere friendship. One day, Helen decided to host a small gathering at her apartment to celebrate their new beginnings. She invited Enrique, John, and Ethan. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and lively conversation. "I never thought I'd be celebrating something like this after everything that's happened," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "Sometimes the darkest situations lead us to the brightest moments," Helen replied, smiling. Enrique, with a look of determination, added, "We've been through a lot, but together we've shown that truth and justice prevail." John nodded, looking at his son with pride. "And no matter how difficult the road, there's always a way to redeem yourself." The light of dawn filtered softly through the hospital curtains, illuminating the room where Enrique rested. It had been weeks since the incident, and although the physical pain still lingered, his spirit was beginning to heal. Helen sat by his bed, replaying recent events in her mind. "How are you feeling today?" Helen asked, looking up from a paperback book. Enrique smiled weakly. "Better, although it still hurts sometimes when I move. But I guess that's part of the process." Helen nodded, placing her hand on his. "You're making incredible progress. Every day is a step forward." Enrique's recovery had been slow but steady. The doctors were impressed by his strength and determination. The wound he had suffered, although serious, was healing well thanks to meticulous care and his unwavering spirit. "My father is coming today," Enrique said, his tone a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "We've talked a lot, but it's always different in person." "I understand," Helen replied. "It's a big step for both of you. Take your time." Shortly after, John Puth arrived at the room. He wore an expression of concern and hope on his face. He approached Enrique's bed and sat down in a nearby chair. "Hello, son," John said with a tentative smile. "Hi, Dad," Enrique replied, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't fully express. For the next hour, father and son talked about the past, about the lost years, and about the opportunities to rebuild their relationship. There was much pain and regret, but also a genuine desire to heal and move forward. "I always thought of you every day," John said, his voice cracking. "I never stopped looking for you, but life, sometimes it's cruel." Enrique nodded, taking his father's hand. "I know, but we're here now, and that's what matters." Helen watched from a distance, feeling a deep gratitude for the opportunity to witness this reconciliation. She knew that these moments were crucial for Enrique's emotional recovery. Over time, Enrique and John began to spend more time together, rediscovering the connection they had lost. Helen was a constant pillar of support, offering her love and understanding unconditionally. The relationship between Helen and Enrique also blossomed during these days of recovery. They would spend long afternoons talking about their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. One afternoon, as they were walking through the hospital garden, Enrique stopped and looked at Helen seriously. "Helen, I've been thinking a lot about our future," he said, taking her hand. "Everything that's happened has made me realize what's really important." Helen looked at him, her eyes filled with affection. "And what's most important to you?" "You," Enrique replied without hesitation. "I want us to build a life together. I want us to be a family." Helen's heart pounded as she heard those words. "I want that too, Enrique. More than anything." As Enrique continued his recovery, they began to make concrete plans for their future. They talked about finding a place to live, about how they would support Ethan in his new life, and about how they would face together any challenges that came their way. Over time, Enrique found a new identity, not only as John Puth's lost son, but as a man who had overcome adversity with courage. Helen, for her part, found in Enrique and in her own struggle an inexhaustible source of inspiration and strength. The future looked bright for both of them. With every plan they made, with every dream they shared, they built a solid foundation for a life filled with love, mutual support, and new possibilities. As the sun rose on the horizon, Helen and Enrique knew that, despite all the obstacles, they were destined to build something beautiful together. Helen looked at her reflection in the mirror with a mixture of pride and relief. After months of uncertainty and struggle, she'd managed to get her job back at the hospital and clear her name. The administration not only offered a public apology, but also honored her as an example of integrity and professionalism. "You've been through a lot, Helen, and you've come out stronger," Enrique said, approaching her. "I'm very proud of you." "Thank you, Enrique. I couldn't have done it without your support," Helen replied, turning to hug him. The legal process to incriminate Max had been long and complicated, but finally, with the support of John and Enrique, they were able to bring him to justice. Max was convicted of his crimes, and the truth about his plan to fake his death came to light. The medical community, which had initially doubted Helen, now saw her as a hero. Meanwhile, Ethan, who had found a mentor in Mr. Cobb and an opportunity to redeem himself, was settling into his new life. He worked diligently at the cemetery, finding in the daily tasks a sense of purpose and stability. "Ethan, you're doing an excellent job," Mr. Cobb said one afternoon, as they finished planting flowers around a grave. "I'm so happy to see how you've turned your life around." Ethan smiled, feeling a deep gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Cobb. I don't know where I'd be without your help and the help of Helen and Enrique." The lives of Helen, Enrique, and Ethan began to intertwine in unexpected ways. On weekends, they would gather at Helen's house for dinners and conversation, strengthening the bonds they had formed during their difficult journey. "I never thought I'd find a family like this," Ethan said one night, as they were enjoying a home-cooked meal prepared by Helen. "You guys have been my anchor in the storm." Enrique raised his glass. "To the family we choose and the future we build together." John, who had found a new opportunity to reconnect with his son, also joined these gatherings, contributing his wisdom and experience. The Puth mansion, once a symbol of distance and secrets, now resonated with laughter and lively conversation. "Enrique, I want you to know how much I regret all those lost years," John said one afternoon as they were walking through the garden. "But I'm grateful for this second chance." "Me too, Dad. We have a lot to catch up on, and I'm ready for it," Enrique replied, smiling. Helen and Enrique, in particular, found a constant source of support and love in their relationship. They shared dreams and plans, talking about how they wanted to build their lives together. "I've realized that, despite everything we've been through, there's something very valuable about this journey," Helen said one night, sitting on the porch under a starry sky. "And what's that?" Enrique asked, holding her hand. "We have each other, and that's enough to face any challenge," Helen replied, smiling. They decided to renovate Helen's house, transforming it into a home that reflected their hopes and dreams. They painted the walls with warm colors, bought new furniture, and decorated with mementos and photos of their travels and shared moments. "Every corner of this house tells a part of our story," Enrique said, admiring the work they had done together. "And every day that passes, we'll add new chapters," Helen replied, feeling a deep satisfaction. The integration of Ethan and John into their lives also brought a new dimension to their home. Every visit was an opportunity to share, learn, and grow together. The deep conversations and shared laughter became the fabric that bound their hearts. "This home is not just a refuge, but a place where love and resilience blossom," John said one night as they all sat together around the fireplace. "It's a reminder that no matter how dark the path, there's always a light at the end," Ethan added with a serene smile. Life went on, full of challenges and victories, but always with the certainty that they were in it together. Helen, Enrique, and Ethan, along with John, formed a unique family, united by fate and strengthened by love and loyalty. On a symbolic spring afternoon, they gathered in the garden, planting a tree to symbolize their growth and hope. Helen, shovel in hand, looked at her friends and her love, feeling a deep gratitude. As the sun set, bathing the garden in a golden light, Helen, Enrique, Ethan, and John stood there, together, looking towards the future with hope and determination. And so concludes this fascinating story of mystery and redemption. I hope you enjoyed unraveling the hidden secrets behind Max Puth's faked death as much as I did. Through the perseverance and courage of Helen, Enrique, and John, we have seen how the truth always finds its way, even in the darkest of times. If you liked this video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories full of intrigue and excitement. Leave your comments below about which part you found most shocking, or if you have any theories about what might have happened next. We would love to read your opinions. Remember to follow us on our social media to stay up to date on all the news and exclusive content. And as always, thank you for joining us on this journey. See you in the next video.